Should schools call CPS on families who can't afford lunch? Is an empty lunch account really a valid reason to separate children from their families and peers, force them to nibble on crackers in the principal's office, or ban them from participating in after-school activities? These are questions we need to answer because all over America, children are being penalized by public schools just because they're hungry. Today, we're uncovering the unsettling truth about lunch shaming and the extreme steps that some schools are taking against families who can't afford school meals, and how some advocates are fighting to stop it. Imagine this. Your daughter, once bright-eyed and eager for school, suddenly dreads going to class every morning. You know times have been tough since you lost your job, but you're doing the best you can to scrape by. Meanwhile, she's quietly been going to school without lunch money, and unbeknownst to you, she's become the victim of bullying, not just by her peers, but also from the adults at the school too. Instead of the support that she needs during this difficult time, your daughter has been isolated. She's forced to eat alone in the principal's office, her meal nothing more than some pretzels and a little bit of fruit. After a few weeks, she brings home a letter informing you that your daughter will not be allowed to attend any after-school events until you pay up. And if you don't do it soon, they'll report you to the government for abuse or neglect. What was once a source of education and joy for your daughter has become a tremendous source of distress and shame that has damaged her self-esteem, destroyed her confidence, ruined her love for learning, and is now threatening to tear your family apart. This isn't sensationalism. These are very real consequences that are happening to students all around the country. Over 30 million students can't afford their school meals, according to the Education Data Initiative. In a recent survey, 68.8% of schools said they had students with unpaid lunch debt. The average meal debt is around $180 per child per year. Not surprisingly, there are higher amounts of meal debt in areas that have higher rates of child hunger. Different schools handle unpaid lunch debt in different ways. Some schools have eliminated this problem by generously providing free meals for everyone, but others are taking drastic measures to punish children for their parents' inability to pay. In some schools, students who can't afford lunch are given a small snack like a single granola bar or a basic peanut butter sandwich. Sometimes they can still sit with their friends while they eat. But in other schools, those poor kids are isolated from their wealthier classmates and forced to sit in empty classrooms or in the principal's office while the rest of the students eat. Some schools pin notes to the child's clothes or stamp their arms with messages to make sure that the parents get the message. But in the process, they're also branding those kids in such a way that every student at school knows that little Susie's parents can't pay. In some areas, children don't even know that they don't have lunch money because the schools use online accounts to keep children out of the payment process. These kids sometimes find out the hard way when their hot lunch is pried out of their hands and thrown into the garbage by cafeteria workers while all of their classmates watch. That's what happened in Salt Lake City, Utah, when a cafeteria worker took freshly served lunches away from 32 students and threw them in the trash. Some of those kids didn't even know that they had a lunch debt until that happened. In fact, some of the parents hadn't even been notified yet. Throwing the food away didn't save the school any money, since the lunches were already made. But nevertheless, all of that food went into the garbage can instead of the hungry bellies of children who needed to be fed. That particular incident got a lot of media attention. The school said that the employee violated the district's procedures. The cafeteria worker was placed on paid leave during an investigation, which caused the school to completely change how they handled unpaid lunch debt. But things are even worse in Kansas, where students have more than $23 million in lunch debt. Some of the schools there have developed some very aggressive policies that are designed to force parents to pay up. The Kansas Appleseed Project reported that many schools will take meals away, isolate kids in classrooms away from their peers, give them crackers instead of meals, and even ban them from participating in after-school activities. One school won't even issue grades for students until their debt is paid. And don't forget, 1 in 7 children in Kansas don't know where their next meal is coming from, so these school meals could be the only meal that those children get each day. Oh, and if those measures don't work, there are at least 9 districts in Kansas that will call CPS and report the family for abuse or neglect. That is a drastic action that can lead to traumatic consequences for the child and the family, potentially involving investigations and legal proceedings that can leave emotional scars and cost even more money that the family clearly does not have. As the Kansas Appleseed Project quote, at least 9 school districts in the state have documented policy language where various unpaid meal debt levels trigger the district to contact the Department for Children and Families and report the child as a child in need of care case. Poverty is not a crime and is not neglectful or abusive parenting. Although a referral to DCF might not lead to the child being removed from the home, it could trigger an invasive and distressing investigation process. It is also a waste of DCF resources and stresses an already struggling child welfare system. These consequences are surprisingly common. Over 170 districts in Kansas have policies that segregate poor kids into classrooms or school offices if they can't afford lunch. About 66% of Kansas districts provide an alternative meal to students who can't afford regular ones. Those meals are usually a single granola bar or a basic peanut butter sandwich, but in some schools it could be as basic as a single granola bar or a few crackers. One policy requires the child to eat in the principal's office, where they only get some pretzels and maybe a little bit of fruit. Oh, and even worse, these same districts will often charge the family for those basic snacks at the same cost as a regular complete meal. The families end up paying the same price, even though their child is eating less, and the debt just keeps building. It's a trap, and families can't get ahead. Needless to say, the children of the alternative lunch crowd are stigmatized by the school and by their peers, wrote Dion Leffler of Kansas. It's not a long leap to assume they'll have less enthusiasm for learning and probably wake up every morning dreading everything about going to school. Daily humiliation does that to kids. Of course, this isn't just a Kansas problem either. Teacher Vito Malakari from Pennsylvania is an advocate with the Pennsylvania Cancel Lunch Debt Coalition. Vito told The Guardian that he has watched students be forced to dump a hot lunch in the trash and eat a cold sandwich instead. If you think about it, this effectively costs the school more money because they end up paying for 2 lunches. So it doesn't really make a lot of sense. But the schools don't care. They want the money. In fact, some schools tell students that they cannot attend field trips or even walk at graduation if they have unpaid lunch debt. In Pennsylvania, at least one school district has threatened to put children in foster care if their parents couldn't pay. Again, this highlights how these extreme measures can deeply affect a child's education and emotional well-being, potentially leading to social stigma and long-term psychological impacts. Back in Kansas, 40% of school districts will refer the debt to collection agencies, small claims courts, or even the Kansas Debt Offset Program, which will take the money out of the family's income tax refunds. In some areas, these consequences start very quickly. Parents in Montgomery County, Pennsylvania reported they started receiving multiple emails and text messages every single day when their child owed a whopping 30 cents. See, here's the thing. The United States Department of Agriculture requires that every school have a school meal policy. This policy has to be clearly communicated to the parents. It has to be available online and appear in the school handbook. It has to explain what will happen when a child shows up without money for lunch. And that's it. That's the end of the rules. The USDA doesn't tell schools what the policy has to say. They don't have any national standards about how these debts should be handled. There are no established protections for kids. The schools are just required to have a policy and tell the parents. Everything else seems to be cushioned in softer terms. The USDA tells schools that they should ensure that their efforts don't hurt the kids and that they are encouraged to consider whether the amount they're trying to collect is worth the money they're spending to collect it. But that's just guidance and not actual rules. And that's where things get complicated. That's why the policies can vary so widely, even between neighboring school districts. It just depends on where you live and who's in charge. And that's a big problem for families who move between different schools. If they move from one district to another, they could end up in a completely different situation, even if they've only moved a few streets away. Martha Terrar, an author of the Kansas Appleseed Report, said, quote, "A neighboring district could have a great policy, but your district is potentially reporting kids to DCF. That disparity is something that affects kids." It's an interesting trend. School districts across the United States are reporting record lunch debt after the pandemic. While parents are scrambling to pay for the soaring costs of housing and utilities, schools are also struggling with the soaring cost of meals. Inflation, staffing shortages, and supply chain issues have driven up the cost of school meals to $4 or $5 per child on average. School meals cost about twice as much as they did 5 years ago, but the higher meal price still doesn't cover the school's expenses. The Appleseed Project found that, quote, it currently costs more to produce a school meal than school districts are charging or being reimbursed for. At the same time, more and more families are finding themselves trapped in a tight spot because they make too much for free meals but not enough to actually be able to afford them. As Talon Summers from the Pennsylvania Cancel Lunch Debt Coalition said, quote, there's people who are very, very poor and they're getting free or reduced meals. And there are people who are very wealthy and that are unbothered by the cost. But then there's that very forgotten large middle element, which is not receiving the help that they need, but is still suffering from the debt. And it's those middle-class kids who get caught in the crossfire. Of course, hunger can make it challenging for students to perform well in school. No Kid Hungry has reported that hunger can have a drastic impact on a child's learning. Childhood hunger can literally change the actual structure of the brain. It can affect their lives for years to come. There is data that shows that 80% of hungry children have difficulty concentrating. 76% of hungry children aren't able to learn as well. 62% of children exhibit more behavioral issues when they're hungry. 47% of hungry kids get sick more often. Studies have even correlated how hunger affects hyperactivity and other behavioral issues starting in kindergarten. But when we refuse to feed children at school, we make it harder for them to learn and harder for teachers to do their jobs. We deprive these kids of the chance to become their best selves. I can't help but wonder how many great scientists and brilliant thinkers never flourished because they were too hungry to achieve their full potential. And then there's the emotional impact as well. As one affected student named Vincent Montoya Araminos said, it's the first time you have a personal debt obligation, and you can be 8 years old when that begins. It definitely has a psychological effect on you. I didn't have any money when I was in elementary school. There was a lot of fear about not being able to pay. So I would just skip lunch, and then friends who were sitting near me would give me some of theirs. Talon Summers also once dealt with unpaid lunch debt as a child. Talon said, this is one of the scariest and most pervasive forms of debt we have because it directly affects children. It feels like just starting the doom clock early. One mother in Salt Lake City added, shaming kids for something they have no control over is wrong. It's bullying, plain and simple. So what do we do about it? First, we need to raise awareness of the free and reduced price school lunch program. This program can help low-income families get free or drastically reduced price meals for their students. You can apply by contacting your local school office. If your family earns 130% of the federal poverty line or less, you don't have to pay. If your income is 185% of the federal poverty level or less, you get a great discount. $1 above that limit, though, and you're paying full price, just like everyone else. A lot of families don't know this program exists or how to apply for it, but the good news is that some schools are starting to automatically enroll children without any extra paperwork required. The USDA has been testing a little loophole called direct certification with Medicaid Demonstration Project. This allows schools to automatically offer free or reduced priced lunches to children who already receive benefits from Medicaid. Around 38 states participate in this, and they have collectively enrolled more than 1.4 million students. This certainly helps, but it clearly doesn't fix the problem entirely. After all, Kansas has been doing this since 2022, and Pennsylvania joined up again in 2023, and there are still children there that are struggling. This Medicaid Demonstration Project also allows schools to automatically enroll kids in summer EBT as well. Hopefully more states will get on board soon. The USDA is accepting applications through November 30th, 2025. Now, some schools have taken action by instituting free student meals for everyone. Several states, including California, Colorado, Illinois, Maine, Massachusetts, Minnesota, New Mexico, and Vermont, have introduced initiatives providing free school breakfasts and lunches to all students. Other states like Arkansas, Iowa, Minnesota, New Mexico, and North Dakota have passed laws to protect children and families from the stigma associated with the inability to pay for meals by limiting alternate meals and preventing any form of segregation or overt identification of students who can't afford to pay. The USDA has also authorized another 3,000 school districts to start offering free breakfast and lunches to students through the Community Eligibility Provision. This is a special rule that applies to schools where at least 25% of the students are eligible for income-based assistance programs. This is extremely helpful, but even though 3,000 sounds like a lot, there are over 13,000 school districts in America, so we still have a long way to go. That's why so many advocates are pushing for free school meals nationwide, but those proposals face stiff opposition. Many people are concerned about the financial burden that a program like this would put on taxpayers. Others feel that feeding a child is a parent's responsibility that should not be shouldered by others. Others think that these programs are inefficient, wasteful, and take money from other programs that they deem more deserving. While these concerns may be understandable, the fact remains that something needs to change. In the meantime, some school workers are taking matters into their own hands and spending their own limited means on food for their students. Some teachers, like Emily Stone in Pennsylvania, buy snacks and granola bars with their own wages so that their students can have something to eat. A school cook who reached out anonymously said that the hardest part of their job is choosing between giving a kid a hot meal when they cannot afford it and putting my job at risk. One of the most interesting revelations in the Kansas Appleseed Report is how ineffective the school's collection efforts are. More often than not, schools rely on charitable donations or funds from other accounts to pay that debt. Statistically, parents are only able to cover student lunch debt about 22% of the time. That's less than 1 in 4 accounts that are made current by parents. The Appleseed Project concludes, aggressive debt collection policies also have a low success rate. Enforcing debt collection policies is stressful to families who are struggling, and it is ineffective and inefficient for school districts. They also pointed out that during the pandemic, when lunches were free for all students, Kansas school districts did not have to waste any time, money, or resources trying to collect on these debts. Since only 22% of parents pay anyway, one might argue that the school may actually save money if they stopped spending so much money trying to collect on those debts. Of course, the meals have to be paid for by someone. Whether that's the school district, a government program, or the parents paying out of pocket, there has to be money available to purchase and prepare the food. It's unavoidable. So, what can we do? I don't know. I don't have the answer. I don't know what the ideal solution is. But I do know that letting kids go hungry or punishing them for being poor is not right. It's not good. In fact, it's not just morally wrong, it's detrimental to our society as a whole. By leaving them too hungry to learn properly, these schools risk trapping these innocent children in a cycle of generational poverty that they may never be able to escape. Here's what the Kansas Appleseed Project suggests. Students with debts should be served the same meal as non-debt students. All communications should be directed at the parents, not the child. Children should not be excluded from activities. Collection agencies should never be used. The money spent collecting debt should never exceed the amount of the debt itself. School district policies should not threaten a DCF investigation or make parents fear their child will be taken away from them based solely on their ability to pay for school meals. States, particularly Kansas, should subsidize reduced price meals. There are already 15 other states that do this. It would cost $4 or $5 million a year, which would be less than 0.5% increase in the state's education funding, but it would eliminate lunch debt for families who qualify for reduced price meals. So now it's your turn. How should we handle school lunch debt? Should schools threaten to tear families apart with CPS complaints over unpaid meals? Should we offer free school meals universally to all students? Who should pay for the food? I look forward to reading your respectful thoughts in the comments.